All right, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. And as part of my never-ending battle to try to help students in the AWD 1000 Web Development Technologies and AWD 1111 Database-Driven Web Development classes understand the material, I've been creating a series of video presentations that are based on the ebooks written by Mr. Flavio Copes. He's written ebooks on all the things that you see right there, and so far I've gone over his HTML ebook, his CSS ebook, his JavaScript ebook, and now I'm closing in on the ES5 to ES Next ebook, which will leave me with the Node.js, Express.js, and React ebooks to go. I'm not going to do the other ones. I'm doing 7 out of the, 14 or 15 that he has here. All right, so I left off previously as we were going into the 2016 features, and there's just a couple, so we're going to go probably have about 2 more lectures in here. So as it says, and I want to be honest with you, much of the material that's in here I've never used. All right, so that's why if you think, oh, he's not doing much more than just reading and hitting highlights, that's because I'm giving you what I know. So as it says here with the array.prototype.includes, it's a more readable syntax for checking if an array contains an element. With EX6 and lower, you had to use the index of, which returned -1 if a value wasn't there, and its location if it was. Since -1 is a value, it is a true value, you could not do something like this. All right. The exponentiation operator, it's funny, when I first started teaching, Visual Basic and then Visual Basic.net were pretty much the hot languages. And both of them allowed you to do exponentiation by doing this. But until, as it says there, about 2018 or whatever it was, you couldn't do that in JavaScript. You had to use the math pow operation. So what they're saying here is these two things are equivalent. Again, this is going to result in a few less keystrokes. It may make it easier for somebody looking at it to take, to understand what's going on. And again, as it says, it's standardized across several languages. That's it for 2016. So for 2017, string padding. As it says, it allows you to add characters to a string so that it reaches a specific length. 2017 introduced 2 string methods, pad start and pad end. I'm sure you can understand the difference. All right. Pad start to put blanks before, pad end to put things at the end. There are several of these object methods that are in here, such as Object.values, which, as it says here, returns an array containing all the object own property values. All right, so you can see what it's returning here. The values, not the keys, but the values. And it also works on arrays. There's Object.entries, and again, you can see this. It says this method returns an array containing all of the object's own properties as an array of key value pairs. So it's an array of arrays, so to speak. And it also works with arrays. Object.getOwnPropertyDescriptors, as it says, it returns all of its own non-inherited property descriptors of an object. Any JavaScript object has a set of properties, and each of these contains a descriptor, which is a set of attributes of a property composed of or by a subset of value, the property's value, writable, whether or not it can be changed, get, called when the property is read, set, called when the property is going to be given a value, configurable, as it says, if false, the property cannot be removed, and enumerable, true if the property is enumerable. In what way is this useful? ES6 gave us Object.assign to copy all enumerable own properties from one or more objects and return a new problem. Return a new object. However, there is a problem with that because it does not correctly copy properties with non-default attributes. So they're saying that if you've got this and you try making a copy with a sign, that won't work. But this will work. Okay. Trailing commas, it says this feature allows you to have trailing commas in function declarations and function calls. So notice there's one there and there's one there. This change will encourage developers to stop the ugly comma at the start of the line habit. All right, let's just quickly jump into async here. We've talked about asynchronous before, but let's talk about it again. It says JavaScript evolved in a very short time from callbacks to promises. And since 2017, asynchronous JavaScript is even simpler using the async await syntax. Async functions are a combination of promises and generators. Basically, they're a higher level of abstraction. So again, more is happening behind the scenes. The author says there, let me repeat, async await is built on the concept of promises. So why were they introduced? They reduce the boilerplate around promises. So it's less code that you have to write. They don't break the chain limitation of chaining promises. When promises were introduced in 2015, they were meant to solve a problem with asynchronous code, and they did. But it was obvious that there must be something better. So promises, as it says, were introduced to solve the callback hell problem, but they basically gave their own levels of complexity. All right, it says they were good primitives around which a better syntax could be exposed, and that ended up becoming async functions. They make the code look like it's synchronous, but it's asynchronous and non-blocking behind the scenes. So, as mentioned there with the way that it works, an async function returns a promise. When you call this a function, you prepend the word await to it. And the calling code then will stop until the promise has either been resolved or the promise has been rejected. The client function must be defined as async for this to work. So they work in tandem with one another. There's a quick example. And as it says, what that will print to the code, notice there's a set timeout in here for 3 seconds. So this will say before, it'll call do something, but it'll wait for 3 seconds. While it's waiting, it'll print after, and then it'll print I did something. All right, after the 3 seconds has expired. Prepending the async keyword to any function means that that function will return a promise. Even if it's not doing so explicitly, it will internally make it return a promise. All right, so they're showing there that code in that first example they say is valid. And this ends up being the same as this. Now, again, remember all this stuff is relative. So the author says here, as you can see in this example, the code looks very simple. That's not necessarily true. All right. Compare it to the code using plain promises with chaining and callbacks. All right, it says all this is a very simple example. The major benefits arise when the code is much more complex. So they say you can rewrite this as this. So with promises, you've got a bunch of thens. So if this works, do this. If this works, do this. If this works, etc. And in here, you're doing it as almost basically more of what it is, kind of separate calls. All right. Async functions can be chained very easily, and the syntax is much more readable than just plain promises with examples. Debugging promises is hard because the debugger will not step over asynchronous code. Async await makes this easier because to the compiler it is synchronous code, which is the way that it's set up. All right. Web workers, as mentioned there, are used to create multi-threaded programs in the browser. All right. They offer a messaging protocol via events. Since 2017, you can create a shared memory array between web workers and their creator using a shared array buffer. Since it's unknown how much time writing to this shared memory is going to take to propagate, atomics can be used as a way to enforce that when reading a value, any kind of write is completed. And as it says, you can find out more there if you want. Again, I have not used most of this stuff. 2018, a good place to stop, I think. Again, some of these I think are not very long lectures. Again, this one's at 11 minutes, but I'm basically at about 15 pages left to go. And since I'm at 2018, it's a good time to go in and start talking. Like I think we'll talk more about the spread operator in just a couple minutes.